"That old loom is Firewood," the auctioneer said, and he knocked it down for $60 flat. Nobody standing in that barn knew they had just sold off the key to a house on a lake. Kyle Ferguson got the cottage on North Shore Road. Tracy Jenkins got the investment accounts. Martha Ferguson, who had spent 23 years making herself useful to a family that never once wrote her name into anything that mattered, got a suitcase, her late husband's pocket knife, and whatever she could carry off the lot before the gavel came down on it. "She signed like she agreed with us," Kyle told his sister, the week Martha took the buyout without a fight. Martha didn't argue that day either. She paid her $60, and two men helped her wheel a warped, split-framed floor loom out to a borrowed truck, the same loom her mother-in-law had sat at for 40 years, the one the whole room had just laughed about. And that night, alone in a rented room behind the hardware store, Martha Ferguson picked up a screwdriver and started turning a piece of wood that was never supposed to come loose at all. None of that will make sense yet. To understand why a widow with almost nothing left would drag home a broken loom nobody wanted, you have to go back. Back before the will, back before the funeral, back to a January morning when Ralph Ferguson's heart finally stopped, and further back still, to the beginning of the 23 years that put Martha in that barn in the first place. She was 64 years old that January, a small, steady woman who moved through a sick room the way other people move through their own kitchens. She had come to the Ferguson family in 2003, hired at first, then something more, to look after Ralph's mother, Bonnie, whose hands had gone knotted with arthritis, and whose eyes were failing faster than her spirit was. "You don't have to fold it like that," Bonnie told her the first week, watching Martha smooth a quilt at the foot of the bed. "Nobody checks the corners." "I check the corners," Martha said. Bonnie almost smiled at that. It was the kind of thing Bonnie herself would have said 20 years earlier, standing over a loom instead of a bed. She had run the Ferguson and Hart woolen mill until it shut its doors in 1988, and she still carried herself like a woman who had once been in charge of something. Even blind in one eye, even with fingers too swollen to hold a shuttle, Bonnie noticed everything. She noticed that Martha never left a task half-finished. She noticed that Martha wrote down every dose, every doctor's word, every small change in a spiral notebook she kept in her apron pocket, long before anyone asked her to. "You'd have made a good weaver," Bonnie said once. "You watch the way I used to watch." Martha only shrugged. She did not know then that being watched back, carefully, for 12 years, was going to matter more than anything else she ever did in that house. She married Ralph in 2005, 2 years into caring for his mother, in a small ceremony at the cottage that Kyle and Tracy did not attend. Kyle was 24 that year, already selling real estate, already talking about the lake property like it was a listing waiting to happen. Tracy was 21, newly out of college, and colder to Martha than her brother was, in the quiet way people are cold when they've decided ahead of time not to like someone. "Dad needed a nurse," Tracy said once, not quite to Martha's face, but not quite out of earshot either. "He didn't need a wife." Martha heard it. She kept folding towels. She spent the next 10 years learning Bonnie's habits the way you learn a language nobody else speaks anymore. Bonnie liked her tea a certain way, her curtains open a certain amount, her weaving book stacked a certain order on the shelf, even though her hands could no longer touch the loom itself. Once, helping Bonnie unscrew a lamp base that had rusted stuck, Martha found herself turning it the wrong way out of instinct, and Bonnie laughed, a real laugh, dry and pleased. "Counterclockwise," Bonnie said. "I do everything half a turn different from everybody else. Ralph used to say I did it just to be difficult." "Did you?" "No," Bonnie said. "I did it because that's how you keep something from opening in the hands of somebody who doesn't already know how." Martha didn't think much of it at the time. It was just an old woman's private joke, the kind you file away and don't ask about twice. She had 100 small jokes like that from Bonnie over the years, and she kept every one of them the same place she kept the medication logs, tucked in somewhere quiet, without much ceremony, the way she kept most things that mattered to her. Bonnie died in the back bedroom in 2015, at 91, with Martha's hand on her wrist and Ralph asleep in the chair by the window. Kyle came for the funeral in a rented black suit and left before the reception ended. Tracy cried, genuinely, Martha thought, though it was hard to tell with Tracy whether the tears were for her grandmother or for the fact that grief made everyone look at her. Afterward, the house got quieter. Ralph, who had never been much of a talker even before his mother's illness swallowed up most of the conversation in that house, grew quieter still. He and Martha settled into something Martha would later describe, if anyone had asked her, which nobody ever really did, as good years. Not exciting years, good ones. Then, in 2021, Ralph's heart started failing the way hearts do when they've been carrying too much weight for too long. Slow at first, then all at once. Martha became his full-time caregiver, the way she had once been his mother's, learning a new set of habits, a new spiral notebook, a new rhythm of pills and appointments and small mercies. Kyle called on holidays. Tracy called a little more than that, usually to ask how their father was doing, in a tone that suggested she already knew the answer and had already decided how she felt about it. "You know he could come stay somewhere easier," Kyle said over the phone, one Thanksgiving, loud enough that Martha heard it from across the kitchen, somewhere with actual care staff. "I am actual care staff," Martha said when Ralph handed her the phone. Kyle laughed like she'd made a joke. Ralph Ferguson died on a Tuesday morning in January 2026, 74 years old, in the same back bedroom his mother had died in 11 years earlier, with Martha's hand on his wrist the same way. She sat with him a long while before she called anyone. It was the last quiet hour she would get in that house that wasn't being watched, weighed, or measured by somebody else. Kyle and Tracy arrived within the day, and grief did not soften them the way it is supposed to soften people in the stories that get told at funerals. Kyle walked the property twice before the service, phone to his ear, talking to someone about listing timelines. Tracy went through the kitchen cabinets the second night, quietly, methodically, the way a person goes through a house they have already started thinking of as theirs. Martha noticed. She always noticed. She had spent 23 years learning exactly what people threw away without looking twice, and exactly what they never bothered to check at all. She said nothing about the cabinets. She folded Ralph's shirts instead, the way she had learned to fold Bonnie's quilts once, corners first, whether anyone ever checked them or not. 3 days after the funeral, the phone rang. It was Michael Stone's office, the family's estate attorney, asking Martha to come in for the reading of the will. She wrote the date down in her spiral notebook, in the same steady hand she'd used for 23 years, of doses and appointments and small, careful observations nobody else had thought to make. She had no idea yet what that appointment was going to cost her. She had even less idea what a broken-down loom in a barn on Beebrook Road was eventually going to give back. Martha kept that appointment on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the funeral, in a small office over the pharmacy in New Preston, with a window unit rattling in the corner and a framed photo of Michael Stone shaking hands with somebody at a bar association dinner. Kyle sat on one side of the desk in a jacket that still had the dry cleaner's crease in it. Tracy sat beside him, arms folded, already looking at her phone twice before Stone even opened the folder. "This won't take long," Stone said. "Ralph's will is dated 2002. Martha did the math before he said another word. 2002. 3 years before she and Ralph married. She kept her hands folded in her lap and said nothing. "He never executed a new one," Stone said. "Happens more than you'd think. People mean to update these things, and they just don't. So everything goes where it already says it goes," Kyle said. Not a question. A confirmation he'd clearly already gotten somewhere else. Maybe from Stone's paralegal on the phone before Martha ever walked in. The cottage, the investment accounts, and the mill barn property on Beebrook Road all passed to Kyle Ferguson and Tracy Jenkins, per the terms of the original document, Stone read, in equal shares. Tracy exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the parking lot. "And Martha," Stone said it gently, the way you'd say a name you were about to disappoint. "As the surviving spouse, you're entitled to what the state calls an elective share. Connecticut gives a spouse in a marriage over 10 years 1/3 of the augmented estate, regardless of what the will says. I've run the numbers against the appraisals we have. It comes to roughly $18,000. $18,000, 23 years, and the number the law had for her fit on one line of a spreadsheet. That's the floor," Stone added. "You're entitled to pursue it in probate court if you want to contest further. It could take a year, maybe longer." Kyle leaned forward before Martha could answer. "We don't want that. Nobody wants that." "Nobody wants a year in court," Tracy said, quieter, but not disagreeing. Kyle's lawyer, a young man in a gray suit who hadn't said a word until then, slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. My clients are prepared to offer $20,000 cash in exchange for a full and final release. That's above your elective share. That's fair, and it's fast. We could have a check cut by Friday. Martha looked at the sheet. $20,000, next to a blank line waiting for her signature, next to Ralph's name typed out cold and formal, like a stranger's. You don't have to decide today, Stone said. I know, Martha said, but she also knew what a year in a courtroom would cost her, in more than money, fighting two people who had already decided, long before their father's heart gave out, exactly how this was going to end. I checked the corners, she'd told Bonnie once, 20-some years back, about a quilt nobody else was going to look at twice. She'd meant it about folding linen. It turned out to apply to a lot more than linen. I'll sign, Martha said. Kyle didn't smile exactly, but something in his shoulders came down half an inch. Good, he said. That's smart. She signed like she agreed with us, Kyle told Tracy the following week, in the hallway outside Stone's office. Not quiet enough, the way people who've already won stop bothering to lower their voices. Martha didn't correct him. She had learned a long time ago that correcting a Ferguson cost more than it ever paid back. What the buyout didn't cover was the mill barn. The barn on Beebrook Road hadn't held a bolt of wool since 1988, and Kyle wanted it emptied and photographed for the listing within the month. He hired Chad Hudson, who ran sales out of a pole barn on Route 45, to come clear it all out at once, run it as one lot sale, take his commission, and be done. Whatever doesn't sell, we haul to the dump, Kyle told him, walking the barn floor with a clipboard, kicking at a stack of old bobbin crates. I don't want to be paying storage on my grandmother's junk. There's some nice tools in here, Chad said, eyeing a wall of hand planes and clamps. Might get real money for those. Fine. Whatever's worth something, sell it. Whatever's not, it's gone. Kyle turned to Martha, who was standing near the door with a broom she hadn't been asked to bring because standing in a room doing nothing had never once come naturally to her. You can take whatever you want off the lot before the sale, Kyle said, like he was doing her a favor, which in his own mind he probably was. Save us the trouble of hauling it. Just don't take anything that's actually worth listing. I won't get in your way, Martha said. I know you won't, Kyle said, and walked off toward the loom in the back corner, the one nobody had touched since Bonnie's hands stopped being able to work a shuttle, gave it one look, and moved on without a second thought. That night, back in the rented room behind the hardware store, $140 a week, due every Friday, whether she'd earned it that week or not, Martha found an envelope slid halfway under her door. No name on the front. Inside, folded once, $47 in small bills, and a scrap of notebook paper and handwriting that shook, the kind of shake that comes from age, not fear. For the grocery run. No need to thank anybody. She stood in the doorway with the envelope in her hand for a long moment. She didn't know anyone in New Preston well enough to be handed money through a door. She hadn't told a soul in town what her weekly rent was, or that Friday was tight, or that she'd been living for 2 weeks on what was left in a checking account that used to belong to a household of 2 and now belonged to a household of 1. She counted the bills twice, like the counting might tell her who'd counted them out first. It didn't. She folded the note back along its crease, the way she folded everything, corners first, and put it in the same spiral notebook where she kept the dates that mattered, next to the entry for Michael Stone's office and the number $18,000 circled once. The estate sale was set for the following Saturday. Chad ran an ad in the local paper and tacked a flyer to the hardware store's bulletin board, close enough that Martha passed it twice a day without meaning to. Item after item was numbered in grease pencil across the sale barn floor. Bobbin crates, wool combs, a roll-top desk with a broken hinge, and near the back, half in shadow, a warped 4-harness floor loom with a swollen beam, tagged item 41, the same loom Bonnie Ferguson had sat at for 40 years. The loom nobody in that family had so much as dusted off since 2015. Martha walked the length of the barn the morning of the sale, before the first cars pulled into the gravel lot, before Chad set up his folding table and his cash box. She stopped in front of the loom the way you stop in front of a photograph of somebody you used to know. Not quite sure yet what you're looking for, only sure that you're looking. The barn filled up slow that Saturday morning, the way these things always do. Trucks pulling into the gravel one after another, doors slamming, men in canvas coats walking the tables before the sale even started, picking up tools and setting them back down like they were testing the weight of a decision. Chad Hudson worked the crowd the way he worked every sale. Loud, easy, a little bit of a showman. He had his cash box open on a card table by 9 and his number sheet stacked and ready by 9:15. "Morning, folks," he called out, once enough people had gathered. "We've got a good lot today. Ferguson Mill barn, cleared out top to bottom. Tools, furniture, some real nice woodwork in here. Let's get moving." The first hour went the way estate sales go. A roll-top desk with a broken hinge sold for $18 to a man who said he'd fix the hinge himself. A crate of wool combs went for $12. A set of hand planes, the ones Chad had promised Kyle would bring real money, sold for $110 total, split across 4 buyers who each wanted 1 or 2. Martha stood near the back the whole time, arms folded against the cold coming through the barn doors, watching her mother-in-law's whole working life get called out in dollar amounts and knocked down with a gavel. Item 41 came up a little after 11. 2 men wheeled the floor loom to the front on a furniture dolly, and it groaned the way old wood groans when it's been asked to move after sitting still too long. The frame had warped enough that one side canted a few inches lower than the other. The beam across the top, the one the yarn used to wind around, had swollen and split along one seam like a plank left out in the rain. "Now this one," Chad said, walking around it once, "this here is an antique floor loom, 4 harness, real nice piece in its day." He knocked on the frame with his knuckles, and it gave a hollow, tired sound back. "But I'll be honest with you all, this frame split and this beam swollen clean through. That's not a repair job, that's a firewood job. I'd call this $60 in scrap walnut and maple, and that might be generous." A few people laughed. Nobody raised a number sheet. $60, do I hear it? Chad said. $60 somebody. Come on, it's good wood even if the machine's dead. Martha raised her hand before she'd fully decided to. 60 from the lady in back, Chad said, and looked around once for a challenge that didn't come. $60 going once, going twice. Sold to Mrs. Ferguson for $60. He said it kindly enough. He wasn't trying to embarrass anybody. It just didn't occur to him that there was any other way to say it. Martha walked up and counted 3 20s into his hand, out of the same envelope where she still had 40 of the $47 somebody had slid under her door. She didn't let herself think too hard about that math. "You want help getting that out of here?" Chad asked. "It's an awkward carry with the frame like that." "I'll manage," Martha said, though she had no truck, no dolly of her own, and no plan beyond the fact that she wasn't leaving that loom in a barn to be hauled to a dump the following week. That was when she heard a voice behind her, older, a little rough at the edges, the kind of voice that had spent decades talking over machinery. "You're not seriously taking that home for firewood." She turned around. A man stood there, 70-some years old, thick through the shoulders still, wearing a canvas coat gone soft with age and a cap that said nothing anymore, the lettering worn clean off it. He wasn't looking at Martha. He was looking at the loom, and he'd gone a kind of still that didn't match the rest of the room. "I don't know what else you'd call it," Martha said. "I'd call it Bonnie Ferguson's loom," the man said. "I'd know that frame anywhere. I built half the cabinet work on it myself." Martha felt something in her chest tighten, quiet and sudden. "You knew Bonnie. Worked beside her 19 years, he said. "Name's Dwayne Morrison. I came on at Ferguson and Hart in 75. Ran the machine shop till the mill closed in 88. I heard there was a sale out here and figured I'd come look, out of habit more than anything. Didn't expect to see this thing sold off as scrap." "I'm Martha," she said. "I was married to Ralph, Bonnie's son." Dwayne nodded slow, like that answered a question he hadn't asked out loud. "I heard he passed. I'm sorry for that. Thank you." He walked a slow circle around the loom, the way you'd walk around a person you hadn't seen in years, checking to see what time had done to them. He ran a hand along the swollen beam, frowned at the split seam, tapped the frame joint with one knuckle the same way Chad had, except his face didn't move the same way when he did it. "You buy this to burn it?" he asked her. "I bought it because nobody else in that room was going to," Martha said. "Seemed like somebody ought to." Something in that answer settled him. She could see it. He looked at her a beat longer than the words called for. "You got a way to move it?" "Not yet. I've got a truck out front and a bad knee that's going to complain about this the whole way home," Dwayne said. "But I'm not about to let Bonnie Ferguson's loom get shoved in the back of somebody's pickup by 2 fellas who don't know a warp beam from a fence post. Let me help you." They loaded it together, slow and careful, Padding the frame with an old moving blanket Dwayne kept folded behind his truck seat out of habit, same as everything else about him. He talked while they worked, not much, just enough. Bonnie ran that mill like it was a piece of her own hands, he said, tightening a strap. Sharpest eye in the building, even after her hands started going. She'd catch a flaw in a bolt of wool from across the room that the rest of us would have missed standing right over it. She was like that at the end, too, Martha said. Blind in one eye, and she still noticed everything. Dwayne glanced at her sideways. You knew her at the end? I looked after her. 12 years. Then I looked after her son, another 5, till January. Dwayne was quiet a moment, working the last strap through its buckle. 23 years around that family, he said. And they let you walk out with a broken loom and a suitcase. It wasn't a question, so Martha didn't answer it like one. That's about the size of it. Huh, Dwayne said, and left it there, though something in the way he said it told Martha he was going to keep thinking about it. They drove it back to the rented room behind the hardware store, $140 a week, and wrestled it in through the side door with the shopkeeper's blessing and a fair amount of grunting on Dwayne's part about his knee. Once it was upright again, Dwayne set to resetting the frame, the way a man sets to a familiar job even when nobody's paying him for it, squaring the joints, checking the cants, running his palm along every surface like he was reading it. This side's not so bad, he said, half to himself. Frame'll true up with some clamps and a little patience. Beam's the real trouble. He crouched down by the swollen beam and turned it slow in its cradle, checking the seam where it had split along the grain. Then his hands stopped moving. What? Martha said, watching his face. Dwayne didn't answer right away. He ran his thumb along the turned wooden cap at the end of the beam, the little decorative piece that finished it off, the kind of detail you'd walk past 100 times and never think twice about. This cap, he said slowly. This shouldn't be sitting like this. Like what? It's proud of the beam, just a hair. You wouldn't notice it unless you'd built the thing yourself. He tapped it once with a knuckle, and it gave a different sound than the rest of the wood around it, hollower, thinner. I helped Bonnie build cabinet work in that mill for 13 years. I know every trick she liked. And Bonnie Ferguson never in her life left a seam sitting proud like that. She'd have sanded it flush in her sleep. Martha came and crouched beside him, close enough to see what he was seeing, though she still wasn't sure what that was. You think somebody messed with it? She said. I think somebody built it that way on purpose, Dwayne said. And there was something careful in how he said it now, like a man picking his way across ice he wasn't sure would hold. This end cap turns, I'd bet you money on it. And I'd bet you it doesn't turn the way you'd expect. He reached into his coat pocket, came up with nothing, and looked around the small room until his eyes landed on Martha's toolbox by the door, the one she'd carried out of the Ferguson house, along with her suitcase and Ralph's pocket knife, because nobody had told her not to. You got a flathead in there? Martha found one and handed it to him, and for a second he held it out to her instead of taking it back. No, he said. You do it. It was your $60. Martha took the screwdriver. Her hand was steady, the way it had stayed steady through 12 years of Bonnie's medicine and 5 years of Ralph's, but her heart was doing something it hadn't done in a long while, something that felt less like grief and more like a question waiting on an answer. She set the tip of the screwdriver against the seam of the end cap, the way you would if you were about to do something perfectly ordinary, and looked at Dwayne once before she turned it. Which way? She said. Try left first, Dwayne said. Everything about that woman ran against the grain. Martha set the screwdriver against the seam and turned it left. Slow, the way you'd turn a key in a lock you didn't trust. Nothing happened for half a turn. Then something gave. A small grinding give, wood against wood, old and dry, but not stuck. Not really stuck at all. She stopped. Keep going, Dwayne said. His voice had dropped low, the way a man's voice drops when he's watching something he half expected and still can't believe. She turned it again. The cap spun free in her hand on the third full rotation, lighter than it had any right to be, and came away from the beam clean. Martha sat back on her heels and looked at what she was holding. A turned piece of walnut, maybe 2 inches across, threaded on the inside like a jar lid. Ordinary, except for the fact that a piece like that had no business coming off a warp beam at all. Lord, Dwayne said quietly. The beam itself sat open now, a dark hollow running down its center where solid wood should have been. Martha leaned close. There was something inside, pushed back a few inches, pale against the dark of the wood. Don't reach in there blind, Dwayne said. Could be anything's been sitting in that 30-some years. Mice, rot, who knows. It's cloth, Martha said. I can see the edge of it. She worked 2 fingers in along the side of the beam and drew it out slow, careful not to snag it on the rough inner grain. It came free all at once, lighter than she expected, wrapped tight in oilcloth, gone stiff and dark with age, tied once around the middle with a length of the same waxed cotton twine. Bonnie used to whip the ends of her warp threads so they wouldn't fray. Martha held it in both hands and didn't move. Go on, Dwayne said. It's not going to open itself. She untied the twine. Her hands were steadier than her breathing. The oilcloth peeled back in one piece, and inside it, folded twice over, was a single sheet of heavy paper, the kind with a raised seal at the bottom, and tucked against it, a smaller scrap of graph paper covered edge to edge in tight rows of numbers and marks. Nothing that read like words at all. Martha unfolded the larger sheet first. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at, because nothing about the moment matched what she'd expected to find in a hollow piece of wood in a rented room behind a hardware store. It's a deed, she said. Dwayne leaned in over her shoulder, close enough that she could smell the truck exhaust still on his coat. A deed to what? A parcel. She read it again to be sure she wasn't inventing it. 1/2 acre, Lake Warramog. There's a cottage on it, it says. Caretaker's cottage. She looked up at him. This is dated 1988. Dwayne didn't say anything right away. He took the sheet from her, gently, the way a man handles something he's afraid of dropping, and held it at arm's length to read the fine print at the bottom. Ferguson, he said. Bonnie Ferguson. Grantee. He looked at Martha over the top of the page. You ever hear tell of this? Land on the lake? 20 years married into that family, Martha said. 23 years, if you count from when I started looking after her. Nobody ever said one word to me about land on Lake Warramog. Not Bonnie, not Ralph. Not Kyle or Tracy, and believe me, if there'd been something worth having, one of them would have mentioned it by now, if only to make sure I knew it wasn't mine. 88, Dwayne said again, like the number itself was doing work in his head. That's the year the mill closed. You're sure? I watched them padlock the door myself. Last week of work, we all got our final checks. And I remember because Bonnie's severance was bigger than mine, on account of she'd run the place since her husband passed, and half the floor grumbled about it behind her back for a week. He handed the deed back to Martha like it had gotten heavier in his hands. She had money that year, not a fortune, but she had some, and she never spent it on a single new thing in that house. Not once. Not in the whole time I knew her after. Martha looked down at the graph paper next, the smaller scrap, and turned it over once as if the numbers might make more sense from the other side. They didn't. What do you make of this? She said, and held it out to him. Dwayne took it and studied it a long moment, his mouth working like he was tasting something. That's a threading draft, he said finally. Or it's built to look like one. See these rows here, 4 across? That's harness notation. Any weaver worth her salt could read the pattern off this and set her loom to it blind. But there's numbers in here that don't belong in a threading draft. See this string here, running down the margin? He tapped a column of figures that ran the length of the page, small and cramped. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for exactly that. That's not weaving? I don't know what that is. But I know who might. Bonnie wrote in code, Martha said slowly. And it wasn't really a question. It was a thing settling into place in her, the way the deed had settled into her hands. She hid a deed inside a piece of furniture nobody was ever supposed to look twice at. And then she wrote whatever comes next in a language only a weaver could read. That woman never did one thing the plain way if there was a crooked way handy, Dwayne said. And there was something almost fond in how he said it. 40 years fond. A man missing somebody he'd worked beside longer than he'd worked beside his own brothers. I told you. Left turn, not right. That was Bonnie all the way through. Martha sat with the deed in her lap and the little threading draft balanced on top of it and felt the whole shape of the last 5 weeks tilt sideways under her. $60 for a loom Chad Hudson called Firewood in front of a room full of strangers. $47 folded once under a door she still hadn't found the sender of. $18,000 circled in a spiral notebook for signing away every claim she might have had on a house she'd scrubbed and swept and sat up nights in for over 2 decades. And now this. A piece of land she'd never heard named once, in a deed with Bonnie's own hand on it, hidden where nobody but a mill machinist with 13 years of cabinetry between them would ever have thought to look. Why? Martha said, mostly to herself. Why would she go to all this trouble and never say a word? Dwayne shook his head slow. Can't answer that. Wasn't in the room for whatever she was thinking. But I can tell you this much. He set the graph paper down carefully on the edge of the loom's frame, like he didn't trust his own hands with it a second longer than he had to. Bonnie Ferguson didn't do anything by accident. Not one thing in 40 years I watched her work. If she hid a deed in a hollow beam and wrote the next part of it in Weaver's shorthand, that's because she didn't want it found by just anybody. She wanted it found by somebody who'd know what she was looking at when they found it. I don't know what I'm looking at, Martha said. I never wove a day in my life. No, Dwayne agreed. But I know somebody who has, wove under Bonnie for years, starting back in the 70s. Learned every trick the woman had, including, I'd bet you good money whatever's sitting in these numbers. He picked the scrap back up, careful, and held it out to her. Joyce Hart. Lives 3 streets over from the hardware store. Corner of Church and Hopkins. Little blue house with the wreath still up on the door from Christmas because she never remembers to take it down. She apprenticed under Bonnie starting in '74. If anybody left living can read what your mother-in-law wrote here, it's her. Martha took the graph paper back and held it flat against her palm, the numbers pressed there like something she could feel through her skin if she paid close enough attention. You think she'll talk to me? Martha said. I've never met the woman. She'll talk to you, Dwayne said, the second you tell her whose loom this came off of and what was hiding inside it. Joyce loved that woman like family. More than some family manages from what you're telling me. He said it plain, no bite to it, but Martha heard the aim in it all the same, and didn't argue, because there wasn't anything in it to argue with. She folded the deed back along its crease and wrapped it in the oilcloth again, twine and all, the way it had come to her, and set it on the little table beside her bed, next to the notebook, with the number 18,000 circled in it. 2 pieces of paper. One that told her what she'd already lost. One that hadn't told her anything yet, except that there had been more to Bonnie Ferguson than 12 years in a back bedroom had ever let her see. Tomorrow, Martha said. I'll go see her tomorrow. Dwayne nodded and reached for his cap, settling it back over hair that had gone thin and white a long time ago. I'll drive you, he said. Not because I don't think you can find Church and Hopkins on your own, but I worked beside that woman 13 years, and I've got a feeling I'm not walking away from this until I know how it ends. Martha looked at him a moment. This stranger who'd shown up at a sale barn out of habit and hadn't once, in the hours since, treated her like an afterthought, and felt something in her chest that she hadn't let herself feel in longer than she could easily count. All right, she said. Tomorrow, then. Dwayne arrived at 7 the next morning in a truck older than some of the trees on North Shore Road. And he didn't say much on the drive, except to point out where the mill used to stand, a flat gravel lot now, weeds coming up through the cracks like nobody had walked it in years. Martha sat with the oilcloth bundle in her lap the whole way, the deed and the graph paper wrapped back inside it, because it felt wrong somehow to leave it behind in the rented room, even locked. Church and Hopkins turned out to be a corner with a stop sign. Nobody quite stopped at, and a little blue house set back from the road, paint peeling at the eaves, a wreath of dried pine still hanging crooked on the door in the middle of a Connecticut spring. Dwayne parked at the curb and cut the engine. Told you, he said, nodding at the wreath. Every year. She says she'll get to it. He knocked twice, then a third time lighter, and a voice from inside called that the door was open, it was always open, and Dwayne pushed it in without waiting for a second invitation. The front room smelled like cedar and coffee. There was a loom in the corner, too, smaller than Bonnie's, tabletop size, strung with something blue and unfinished, and a woman in a cardigan sitting near the window with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair. Dwayne Morrison, she said, not getting up. You don't come around unless something's wrong. Nothing's wrong, Joyce, or maybe it is. I honestly can't tell you which. He stepped aside so Martha could come through the door behind him. This is Martha Ferguson, Ralph's widow. Joyce's face changed the moment the name landed. Not unkind, just careful, the way a face goes when it's deciding how much of itself to show a stranger. Bonnie's boy's wife, she said slowly. I heard he passed. I'm sorry for it. I would have come to the service if I'd known when it was. There wasn't much of a service, Martha said. Not one I was asked to plan anyway. Something in that answer seemed to settle a question for Joyce, because she nodded once, short, and gestured at the chairs across from her. "Sit down, both of you. I've got coffee if you want it, though I won't promise it's good." Her eyes moved to the bundle in Martha's hands, wrapped in cloth, gone stiff with age, and stayed there. "What have you got?" Martha didn't answer right away. She looked at Dwayne, and Dwayne looked back at her like it was hers to say, so she said it. "Bonnie's loom went up for auction. I bought it for $60 because the auctioneer called it Firewood." She set the bundle on the low table between them. There was a hollow place inside the warp beam, a deed inside it, and this. She unwrapped the oilcloth with the same care she'd used the night before, and laid the graph paper flat on the table, turned so Joyce could read it right side up. Joyce didn't reach for it at first. She sat very still, looking down at the rows of numbers and marks like she was looking at something she'd been waiting 30 years to see again, without knowing it. "Lord," she said, quiet, an echo of what Dwayne had said the night before. And Martha wondered how many people who'd known Bonnie Ferguson well enough would end up saying that same word before this was over. "You recognize it," Martha said. "I recognize the hand." Joyce reached out now and touched the corner of the page with one finger, not lifting it, just touching it. The way you'd touch something to be sure it was real. That's a threading draft. Standard notation, any weaver could follow the pattern of it. 4 harnesses, straight twill, nothing special about the weave itself. She tapped the narrow column running down the margin, the one Dwayne had pointed to the night before. "This part isn't weaving." "That's what I told her," Dwayne said. "You were right to tell her." Joyce finally picked the paper up, turned it toward the window light, and studied it a long moment with her glasses pulled back down over her eyes. Bonnie kept a private hand. Not a secret from the world, exactly, just a habit she had, going back to when we worked together. She'd write notes to herself in threading shorthand when she didn't want the mill floor reading over her shoulder. Payroll figures, personal business, things like that. I only ever learned to read it because she taught me, back when I was young enough to think it was a game. "Can you read this?" Martha asked, and she heard the edge in her own voice, the same edge that had been sitting in her chest since the screwdriver turned left the night before. Joyce didn't answer right away. She got up instead, slow on a bad knee, and crossed to a roll-top desk in the corner of the room, where she opened a drawer and came back with a shoebox, the cardboard soft with handling, a rubber band gone brittle and split around one end of it. She set it on the table and lifted the lid, and Martha saw a stack of envelopes inside, yellowed, some of them still holding their original postmarks. "She used to write me," Joyce said, "every few months, even after I stopped weaving for a living and went to keeping books for the hardware store instead. Most of it was just talk, weather, her garden, how Ralph's boy was doing in school." She glanced up at Martha. "Kyle." "I know who Kyle is," Martha said, and something in how she said it made Joyce's mouth tighten in what might have been the start of a smile, quickly put away. "Some of her letters had a line or two in this same hand," Joyce went on. "Little asides, I taught myself to puzzle most of it out over the years, mostly out of stubbornness, because she never once explained herself when I asked." She set the shoebox lid aside and pulled 2 envelopes free, laying them open on the table beside the graph paper. "This'll take me a minute. I haven't done this in longer than I care to say." She bent over the page with a pencil and a scrap of notebook paper, working slow, sounding out each mark under her breath the way a child sounds out letters, checking it against the old correspondence, crossing out, starting again. Dwayne sat back in his chair and didn't say a word, and Martha understood without being told that this was a kind of patience the man had learned a long time ago, waiting on Bonnie Ferguson to finish a thought before you asked her what it meant. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The coffee Joyce had offered and never poured sat forgotten on the counter. Martha watched Joyce's pencil move and felt the same tightness in her chest she'd felt watching the screwdriver turn, half hope and half a fear she couldn't name. Because whatever this was, it was going to change something, and she had spent 23 years learning not to trust anything that changed. "There," Joyce said finally, and sat back. "There, what?" Dwayne said. Joyce turned her scrap of notebook paper around so they could both see it. Her handwriting was neat, old-fashioned, a school teacher's hand. On the page, in place of the threading marks, she'd written out a string of numbers, and beneath it, 3 words. New Preston Savings. "It's a bank," Martha said. "It's a bank and a number," Joyce said. "Read like a threading draft, it's gibberish." Read the way Bonnie meant it, it's an account number, or a box number, more like, given the way she's laid it out. See here, she tapped the string of digits. That's not enough numbers for an account. That's a safe deposit box code, unless I've badly misremembered how those work, which is possible, I'll grant you. It's been 30 years since I had one myself. Martha stared at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves into something she could argue with. A safe deposit box at New Preston Savings. That's the only bank in this town that's had that name since before either of us was born, Joyce said. It's 2 blocks from where you're standing right now, if that room behind the hardware store is where you're staying. Dwayne let out a breath, low, and rubbed a hand over his jaw. 38 years, he said, mostly to himself. That's how long that bank's been sitting on whatever this points to, if it's still sitting on anything at all. Boxes don't empty themselves, Joyce said. Not unless somebody stops paying the fee, and even then the bank holds it a good long while before they do anything about it. If Bonnie kept that box current every year since '88, it's still there. Question is whether anybody but Bonnie ever had the right to open it. Martha looked down at the numbers on Joyce's notebook page, and then at the deed still lying folded beside it, the half-acre parcel on Lake Warramog that nobody in 23 years of marriage had ever once mentioned to her, and felt the ground under this whole business tilt again, the way it had tilted the night before when the end cap came free in her hand. There's a name that has to go with a box like that, Martha said slowly. Somebody has to be listed on it besides Bonnie. She's been dead 11 years. A bank doesn't let just anybody walk in and ask. Joyce looked at her for a long moment, and something passed over her face that Martha couldn't quite place. Not surprise, exactly. More like the look of someone watching a door open onto a room she'd always suspected was there. Well, Joyce said, I suppose that's the next thing to find out, isn't it? Martha folded the notebook page over once and held it against the oilcloth bundle. The deed and the draft, and now this. 3 pieces of paper that together weighed almost nothing and felt like they weighed more than anything she'd carried out of the Ferguson house on the day she signed away her claim to it. Outside, a car went by slow on Church Street, and somewhere down the block, a dog started up barking at nothing in particular, and Martha sat very still in Joyce Hart's front room, with the tabletop loom in the corner and the smell of cedar in the air, and thought that whatever waited in that bank 2 blocks away, she was not going to find out sitting in this chair. 2 blocks, she said, half to herself. 2 blocks, Joyce agreed, and reached for her cardigan. New Preston Savings sat on the corner of Main and Route 45, brick front, green awning gone faded at the edges, the kind of bank that still kept its hours painted in gold letters on the glass instead of taped up on a printer sheet. Joyce walked between them, cardigan buttoned against a wind that hadn't been there an hour ago, and Dwayne fell into step on Martha's other side without being asked, like he'd already decided this was a 3-person errand and nobody was going to talk him out of it. You're going to have to do the talking, Joyce said to Martha as they crossed the lot. Neither of us has any legal standing here. You're the one married into that family, even if that family didn't act like it. I don't have standing either, Martha said. Bonnie's been gone 11 years. Whatever's on that box, it isn't going to have my name on it. Only one way to find that out, Dwayne said, and held the door. Inside, the bank smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper. 4 teller windows and only one open. A young man behind it, counting a drawer, who looked up like customers. Before 10 in the morning were a novelties. Martha crossed to him with the oilcloth bundle held against her side, the deed and the graph paper, and Joyce's translated notebook page all folded together now, and set the bundle on the counter like it might answer questions on its own if she gave it the chance. I need to ask about a safe deposit box, Martha said. It would have been opened here in 1988, under the name Bonnie Ferguson. The teller's face did the polite blank thing bank faces do. I'd need to pull that up. Do you have a box key or documentation showing you're an authorized signer? No key, Martha said. No documentation. Bonnie Ferguson was my mother-in-law. She passed in 2015. Then I'm going to need to get our branch manager, the teller said, already reaching for the phone at his elbow, and something in his tone told Martha this was not going to be a 2-minute conversation. They waited near a row of plastic chairs bolted along the wall, the kind meant to discourage anyone from getting too comfortable, and Martha sat with the bundle in her lap, while Dwayne paced a slow lane between the door and the water cooler, and Joyce sat very straight beside her, hands folded, watching the manager's office door like she expected it to answer for something. The manager who came out was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a manner that said she had spent 20 years being the person who had to say no to people gently. She introduced herself only as Mrs. Alvarez, shook Martha's hand, and led all three of them into a small back office with a computer screen angled away from the door. "Bonnie Ferguson," Mrs. Alvarez said, typing. "Let me see what we've got." A minute passed. Longer than a minute felt like sitting in that chair. And then her eyebrows went up just slightly, the first honest reaction Martha had gotten out of anybody behind a bank counter. "Well, that's a box that's been open a long time. Fees paid every year, automatic draft, never lapsed once." She looked up over the glasses. "That's unusual. Most people forget these things exist after 10, 15 years. This one's been running since the box was opened." 38 years, Dwayne said quietly, and Mrs. Alvarez glanced at him like she was recalculating something. "So it's still active," Martha said. "The box is still here. It's still here." Mrs. Alvarez turned back to the screen, scrolled, and her mouth pressed into a thin line. "But I can't open it for you today. Box access requires either the original renter, a listed co-signer, or a court-appointed representative of the estate with documentation. I've got no co-signer listed on this account at all, which is also unusual. Most people put a spouse or a child on these for exactly this reason." She looked at Martha steadily. "You said you're the daughter-in-law. That's not enough, I'm sorry to say. If you were named executor of her estate, or if you've got letters of administration, that would do it. Otherwise, the box stays sealed until somebody produces the right paper." Martha felt the floor tilt again, the way it had tilted every time in the last 2 days that something had almost been within reach and then wasn't. "Bonnie's been dead 11 years, she said. "There's no estate proceeding open on her anymore. That closed a long time ago, before I'd have had any reason to be part of it. Then you'd need a court to reopen it, or produce a will naming an executor who could still act," Mrs. Alvarez said. "I know that's not what you wanted to hear." Joyce leaned forward in her chair. "There has to be something else on that account. Some contact, some instruction. Bonnie Ferguson did not build a hiding place inside her own loom and leave the next step of it locked behind a door nobody could open. That wasn't the kind of woman she was." Mrs. Alvarez looked at her for a moment, then back at the screen, scrolling slower this time, reading instead of skimming. "There's a note in the file," she said finally. "Goes back to the original paperwork. It's not common anymore. Banks don't usually take these kinds of instructions these days, but back then, apparently they did." She turned the monitor slightly, not enough to let them read it themselves, but enough that Martha understood she was being shown something real. "It says any inquiry regarding this box is to be directed to the law office of Robinson, filed under the same date the box was opened, 1988. She looked up. That's an unusual thing to put in a bank file, almost like she wanted whoever came asking to be sent somewhere specific. "Robinson," Martha repeated, and the name landed somewhere she couldn't place yet, familiar the way a word is familiar, right before you remember where you heard it. "Robinson Sr.'s long retired," Joyce said slowly. "Long dead too, I believe, unless I'm behind on the news. But his boy kept the practice going, Adam Robinson. Office is still over on Titus Road, same one his father ran out of for 40 years. She looked at Martha. If Bonnie built something legal to go along with whatever's in that box, and she built it back in '88, that's exactly the kind of firm she'd have used. Small, local, the kind of lawyer who keeps his father's filing cabinets instead of throwing them out. Mrs. Alvarez folded her hands on the desk. "I can't tell you what's in the box. I can't even confirm there's anything more than dust in there. But I can tell you the file wants you talking to that office before this bank does anything else with it. That's not me being difficult. That's 38 years of somebody's instructions, and I intend to honor them, same as I'd want somebody to honor mine." Martha sat with that for a moment, the bundle still in her lap, and thought about Bonnie Ferguson sitting in some lawyer's office in 1988, the same year the mill closed, arranging things so carefully that even now, 11 years after her death, a stranger behind a desk was refusing to move an inch without the right piece of paper. It should have felt like another wall. Instead, it felt, for the first time since the auctioneer had said the word firewood, like she was being led somewhere on purpose, one careful step at a time, the same way Bonnie had led people through a weaving pattern for 40 years, never showing the whole cloth until the last row went in. "Titus Road," Martha said. Titus Road, Joyce confirmed. I can call ahead if you'd like. Adam's mother used to buy yarn off me when he was still in short pants. He'll take the call. Dwayne was already standing, cap back in his hand. I told you I wasn't walking away till I knew how this ends, he said. Guess we're not there yet. Mrs. Alvarez stood too, and for the first time since they'd sat down, something almost like warmth came into her face. The look of a woman who spent most of her days saying no to people and didn't mind, for once, watching a door open instead of close. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said. Whatever it is. That account's been paid current since before I started working here. Somebody wanted this to still be waiting whenever the right person finally came asking. Martha thanked her and gathered the oilcloth bundle back into her arms and followed Joyce and Dwayne out through the lobby and into a morning that had turned brighter than it started, the wind dying down, the green awning outside snapping once and going still. She stood on the sidewalk a moment, looking down Main Street toward wherever Titus Road branched off from it, and felt the weight of the deed and the notebook page and all of it settle differently now. Not like a puzzle she was working alone in a rented room, but like a road somebody had laid down for her 38 years before she'd had any reason to walk it. How far is Titus Road? She asked. 10 minutes, Joyce said. Less, if Dwayne drives like he usually does. Dwayne was already pulling his keys out, jangling them once in his palm. Get in, he said. Woman built you a trail this careful? Seems a shame to keep her waiting any longer than we have to. The car was an old green pickup with a bench seat, and Martha sat in the middle with the oilcloth bundle on her knees, Joyce's cardigan sleeve brushing one arm, and Dwayne's flannel brushing the other. And for the length of that short drive, she didn't feel like a woman with no claim to anything. She felt like she was riding in the middle of something that had already decided to hold her up. Bonnie ever talk to you about lawyers? Martha asked Dwayne, over the rattle of the truck bed. In all those years at the mill. Not once, Dwayne said, eyes on the road. Bonnie talked about warp tension and coal bills and whether the roof was going to make it through another winter. She did not talk about lawyers, which is exactly why it sticks in my head, now that I think on it, that she took off 2 afternoons in the spring of '88 and wouldn't say where she'd been. I asked her once. She told me to mind the loom I was fixing and mind my own business while I was at it. That sounds like her, Joyce said from the far window. She'd let you see the whole cloth eventually. Never before, she was good and ready. Titus Road ran off Main behind the old Grange Hall, a short street of white clapboard houses that had mostly turned into offices, a dentist, an insurance agent, and at the end of the block, a 2-story building with a black shingle hanging off a post that read Robinson Law, established 1961 under the newer name and a fresher coat of paint. Dwayne parked crooked across 2 spaces and didn't seem to notice. Inside, the office smelled like paper and pipe tobacco that hadn't been smoked in that room for years, just soaked into the walls from some earlier decade. A young receptionist looked up, said Mr. Robinson was expecting them, and a moment later, a man came out from the back office who looked to be in his 50s, broad through the shoulders, wearing a cardigan not unlike Joyce's own, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair. Joyce Hart, he said, before anyone introduced anyone. You look exactly the same as you did selling my mother wool when I was too small to reach the counter. You were a terror in that shop, Adam Robinson, Joyce said, and something in her voice had gone soft. Ran off with a skein of red yarn once and your mother made you bring it back with an apology. I remember. Adam turned to Martha, and his handshake was steady, the kind of handshake a man gives when he already suspects the conversation is going to matter. Joyce called ahead, said you'd found something that might connect to my father's old files. I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Ferguson, I've been running this practice 11 years, and I still find things in that back room I didn't know were there. Come on back. The back room was exactly what the smell had promised. Floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets, olive green, dented at the corners. A card catalog system that looked older than Adam himself. He led them past 2 rows of it into a smaller office with a single window looking out on a maple tree, and gestured them into chairs that didn't quite match. Tell me what you've got, he said, sitting behind a desk stacked with folders in a way that looked organized only to the man who'd stacked them. Martha set the bundle down and unfolded it, piece by piece, the deed first, then Joyce's translated notebook page with the bank's name written under the string of numbers. She told it in order, the auction, the $60, Dwayne at the sale barn, the beam, the graph paper, the bank that morning, and the note in the file pointing here. She kept her voice even. She had told this story twice already in 2 days, and each time it came out a little more like something that had actually happened to her, instead of something she was still waiting to wake up from. Adam listened without interrupting, turning the deed over once in his hands, holding it up to the window light like he was checking the paper itself before he'd trust a word on it. 1988, he said when she'd finished. That's my father's year. He had that practice running solo by then, hadn't taken me on yet. I was still in law school, telling myself I'd never come back to this town. He set the deed down. Ferguson, Bonnie Ferguson. Give me a minute. He was gone longer than a minute. Martha sat and listened to drawers sliding somewhere down the hall, one after another, a pause, then another drawer, and Dwayne sat with his cap in his lap, turning it slowly by the brim, and Joyce reached over at one point and put her hand briefly over Martha's, just briefly, and didn't say anything, and Martha understood that as its own kind of sentence. Adam came back with a folder so old the manila had gone the color of weak tea, tied shut with a length of red cotton string instead of a clasp. He set it on the desk in front of him like it might need handling. My father kept a ledger, he said, separate from the case files, just a list, client name, date, matter type, in his own hand. I found Ferguson, Bonnie, in there under 1988, and next to it he'd written 2 words instead of the usual shorthand he used for wills and closings. Adam looked up at her. He wrote private trust. A trust, Martha repeated. That's the word he used. Adam untied the string and the folder fell open on its own, worn soft at the fold from being opened and closed a great many times over a great many years, though not, Martha thought, in a long while. This isn't the working file. This is his personal copy, which tells me he considered it important enough to keep close instead of filing loose with the general estate work. Give me a second to actually read it. I don't want to tell you something and have to walk it back. He read. Nobody in that small office said a word while he did it, and Martha found herself counting her own breaths, the way she used to count Ralph's, back when every breath had felt like something she needed to keep track of in case it turned out to be one of the last ones. Well, Adam said finally, and set the folder down flat. I want to be careful here, because I am not going to tell you more than what's actually on this page. But what's on this page is a recorded instrument, filed the same year as your deed, same courthouse, Litchfield County Land Records. My father drew it up and filed it himself. It establishes a trust. Real property held in trust. Not just a will, not just an intention, an actual standing legal instrument. And unless something happened after 1988 that I don't have any record of, it was never revoked and it never expired. He tapped the page. Trusts like this don't need to be renewed the way some accounts do. Once it's filed properly and it's never undone, it stands. Doesn't matter how many years go by. Doesn't matter who dies in between. What's it called? Joyce asked. Does it have a name? Adam ran a finger down the page, found the line, and read it out loud, careful. The way a man reads something he wants to make sure he's getting exactly right. The Beebrook Trust. The name landed in the room and sat there. Martha felt her chest go tight in the same place it had gone tight watching the screwdriver turn. The same place it had gone tight in Joyce's front room over the notebook page. And she understood, before Adam said another word, that this was not a coincidence of geography, that Bonnie Ferguson had named a piece of paper after the road her own mill sat on, the road that ran past the barn, where nobody had touched that loom in 11 years. Beebrook, Martha said. That's where the mill was. That's where the mill was, Adam agreed. I don't think that's an accident given everything else you've just told me. Does it say who it's for? Dwayne asked. His voice had gone rough. Does it say who's supposed to have it? Adam turned the page, and his face changed just slightly. The look of a man reading something he hadn't expected even after everything he'd already read that morning. It names a trustee. Bonnie Ferguson, naturally, she's the grantor and the first trustee both. But there's a line here for a successor. And instead of naming a person outright, it says the successor trustee is to be designated by a sealed letter, to be held separately and opened only upon presentation of the trust instrument itself. He looked up, which tells me there's a letter somewhere that names whoever's supposed to take this over after Bonnie. And I'd bet good money that letter isn't sitting in this folder. I'd bet it's sitting exactly where that bank teller sent you this morning. The box, Martha said. The box, Adam said. This instrument is what you'd need to show the bank to get them to open it under the terms your teller described. Court documentation, she said, or proof tied to the estate. This is better than either. This is the thing itself. He was already reaching for a legal pad, writing something quick across the top. I'll come with you. I don't say that lightly. I've got a docket call at 2, but I am not sending you back into that bank alone with a document this old, and letting some assistant manager decide on her own authority whether it's good enough. I want to be standing there when they open that drawer. Martha looked down at the folder, at her mother-in-law's name typed out in a font from another decade, at a phrase that had sat filed and forgotten in a green cabinet for 38 years, waiting on exactly this morning to matter again. She thought about Bonnie in the back bedroom of the lake cottage, hands gone stiff with arthritis, never once saying a word about any of this, and felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, something closer to awe at how long a person could carry a plan in silence and never let it show on her face. "All right," Martha said, and stood, and gathered the deed and the notebook page back into the oilcloth, like she was folding up a piece of cloth still on the loom, not finished, not ready to be cut free just yet. Then let's go find out what she wanted us to have. Adam didn't wait for his coat. He grabbed his keys off the desk, tucked the old green folder under one arm, and held the office door for the three of them, like the docket call at 2 had already stopped mattering. The drive back to Main Street took 4 minutes, not 10, because Dwayne cut through the Grange Hall parking lot instead of going around, and nobody in the truck said a word about it. Martha sat with the oilcloth bundle in her lap, and Adam's folder balanced on top of it, and she found herself holding both like they might slide off if she loosened her grip even a little. The bank looked exactly the way it had that morning: green awning, brass handle, a hand-lettered sign taped inside the glass door, reminding customers the drive-thru closed at noon on Saturdays. Mrs. Alvarez looked up from her desk when the four of them came back in, and something crossed her face that wasn't quite surprise. "That didn't take long," she said. "Long enough," Adam said, and set the manila folder on the corner of her desk, open to the page he'd already marked with one finger. "Adam Robinson. I don't know if you remember me. My father used to bank here before he retired." "I remember your father," Mrs. Alvarez said. "Came in every Friday at 11 for 40 years. You favor him. I get that a lot." Adam turned the folder toward her. "This is a recorded trust instrument, filed in Litchfield County in 1988, naming Bonnie Ferguson as grantor and first trustee. It names a successor trustee to be designated by sealed letter, to be opened upon presentation of the instrument itself. I believe that letter is sitting in the box your file's been protecting since before I took over my father's practice. I'd like to present this as exactly the kind of document your note was waiting on." Mrs. Alvarez read it once, slow, her finger moving under each line, the way Adams had in his own office. She looked up at Martha, then back down at the page, then reached for a pair of reading glasses on a chain around her neck that she hadn't bothered with earlier that morning. "Well," she said, "that's the second time today somebody's put something in front of me that answers a question I didn't think I was allowed to ask out loud." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "I'm going to need to make a copy of this for the file, and I'm going to need everyone's signature in the visitor log, Mr. Robinson included, since you're standing here as counsel of record. After that, box 1142 is yours to open." It took 11 minutes. Martha counted them without meaning to, the way she'd once counted contractions in a delivery room decades ago holding a friend's hand, the way a person counts anything that matters too much to just let pass unmarked. Mrs. Alvarez ran the copy, had each of them sign a line in a ledger bound in cracked black leather, and pulled a ring of keys from a locked drawer that she handled the way some people handle church keys, careful, a little reverent. "This way," she said, and led them past the teller counter to a heavy door at the back marked Safe Deposit, painted the same gray as everything else in that bank, except for a brass plate above the handle that had been polished so many times the engraving had gone soft and shallow. The vault room was small, colder than the lobby, rows of numbered doors stacked floor to ceiling, like a wall of tiny mailboxes built for something other than mail. Mrs. Alvarez found box 1142 near the bottom, knelt in front of it with a groan she didn't bother hiding, and fitted 2 keys into 2 separate locks, one hers, one that had come with the file itself, kept separate for exactly this reason. "Bank's key opens the outer lock," she said, turning it. "This other one's been sitting in an envelope in my supervisor's office since before I started here. Nobody's touched it in 38 years, going by the paperwork. She turned it too, and both locks gave at once with a sound like a door, somewhere deep in an old house, finally letting go of a swollen frame. She slid the long metal drawer free and set it on a narrow shelf built into the wall for exactly that purpose, then straightened up, hand pressed to her lower back. "I'll leave you to it," she said. "Take whatever time you need. I'll be right outside the door if anyone asks a question." The drawer wasn't heavy. That was the thing Martha noticed first, the lightness of it, after imagining for 2 days what a 38-year secret might weigh. Inside, wrapped in a plastic sleeve gone brittle and yellow at the folds, sat a single bound document, maybe a dozen pages, stapled at the corner and stamped in red ink she recognized now as the same stamp on the county deed. Underneath it, resting flat, was an envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with 3 words written across the front in Bonnie's unmistakable hand, the same slant Martha had seen 100 times on grocery lists and appointment cards taped to the refrigerator in the back bedroom of the lake cottage. "To my successor." Nobody reached for it right away. Dwayne took his cap off entirely, held it against his chest like he was standing at a graveside, and Joyce put one hand over her mouth, not crying, just still, the way a person goes still in front of something too large to react to properly. Adam lifted the bound document first, turned it over once, and let out a breath through his nose. "This is it," he said. "This is the full instrument. Everything my father's ledger told us was true. Bonnie Ferguson, grantor and initial trustee, real property held in trust under the name B. Brook Trust, filed and recorded, never revoked." He set it down carefully on the little shelf and looked at Martha. "Legally, once we confirm the successor, that trust has been standing this whole time. It didn't need Ralph's will to say a word about it. It doesn't answer to Ralph's will at all." "What's the property?" Martha asked. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. Adam flipped to a page near the back, ran his finger down a description written in the flat, exact language lawyers use for land, courses and distances and monument stones instead of anything a person could picture. A half-acre parcel, he read, fronting Lake Warramog, together with the dwelling thereon. He looked up. "There's a cottage on it. A caretaker's cottage, it says here." Martha had never once, in 20 years of marriage to Ralph, heard the words Lake Warramog spoken in connection with anything the Fergusons owned. She had swum in that lake exactly twice, both times as somebody else's guest, at a public beach on the far shore, never once imagining that a piece of it belonged, quietly, to the family whose kitchen she'd cooked in for 2 decades. "I didn't know," she said. "I never knew there was any of it. Not the land, not a cottage, not any of it." "I don't believe anybody knew," Adam said gently. "That's rather the point of building something this way." Joyce had gone quiet, staring at the envelope still resting in the drawer, untouched. "That's her hand," she said finally. "I'd know it in the dark. She wrote me 40 years of letters in that same slant." She looked at Martha. "You should be the one to pick it up. Whatever's inside, it was written for whoever this trust names, and near as I can tell, that's turning out to be you." Martha's hands weren't steady when she reached in. She noticed that distantly, the way she'd noticed her own hands shaking the day she'd signed the buyout papers in Michael Stone's office. Except, this time, the shaking didn't come from being asked to give something up. It came from being asked, for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, to receive something instead. The envelope had weight to it, more than paper alone would carry. And when she turned it over in the cold vault light, she could feel, through the paper, the stiffer edge of something folded inside, alongside whatever pages Bonnie had written. "You don't have to read it standing here," Adam said. "There's a small room off the lobby, private. We use it for clients going through papers. Might be easier than doing it in a bank vault with the 4 of us breathing down your neck." Martha looked at the envelope, at her own name unspoken but somehow already present in those 3 words on the front, "To my successor," and thought of Bonnie sitting somewhere 38 years ago, healthy, sharp, deliberate, choosing exactly this envelope, exactly this ink, exactly this moment to aim at, without knowing who would be standing in the room when it finally arrived. "I'd like everyone to be there when I open it," Martha said. "All 3 of you. You've all carried some piece of this to get me here. I don't think I should be the only one standing in the room when it finally says why." Dwayne put his cap back on and took it off again, an old habit surfacing without him seeming to notice. Joyce reached over and squeezed the Martha's arm once, Quick, the way a person does when words aren't going to hold the weight they need to hold. Adam gathered the bound trust instrument back into its plastic sleeve, tucked it under his arm alongside his father's old folder, and held the vault door open. Then, let's go find that room, he said, and let's find out together exactly what your mother-in-law meant for you to have. The room off the lobby wasn't much bigger than a closet fitted out with a table and 4 chairs, but it had a door that shut, and that was the only thing that mattered to Martha right then. Adam set the trust instrument down on the table like it was something that could still bruise. Dwayne pulled a chair out for Joyce first, the old courtesy still in him, even after everything, and then took the one nearest the door like he meant to guard it. Martha sat last. She turned the envelope over twice in her hands before she let herself open it, running her thumb along the seal the way she used to run her thumb along the edge of a fever chart, checking for something before she was ready to know it. "You don't have to read it out loud," Joyce said. "You could read it to yourself first, if that's easier." "No." Martha shook her head. "I already decided. All 3 of you got me here. I'm not going to be the only one who hears her voice." She slid a fingernail under the flap, and it gave easy 38 years of glue gone dry and brittle. Inside were 2 things. A folded letter, several pages, the same slanted hand from the envelope's face, and beneath it, flat and stiff, a smaller card, official-looking, with a raised seal pressed into one corner. Adam leaned forward just enough to see it without touching it. "That's a notarized designation," he said quietly. "That's the piece that makes the succession binding on its own, separate from the letter itself. The letter can say anything Bonnie wanted it to say. That card is what a judge is going to care about." Martha set the card aside, careful, the way she'd have set aside a good plate, and unfolded the letter. "Martha, if you were the one reading this, then I got exactly what I was hoping for, and exactly what I was afraid of, both at once. I was hoping you'd be the one standing in that bank someday. I was afraid of what it would mean that you were." Her voice caught there, just slightly, and she stopped and looked up at the 3 faces waiting on her. "Go on," Dwayne said. "Take your time. Nobody's rushing you." Martha nodded and found her place again. "I watched Kyle and Tracy grow up asking one question about everything, and it wasn't the question I wanted them asking. They wanted to know what a thing was worth, and who was going to end up with it. I don't fault them entirely. Their mother left when they were young, and Ralph did his best, and grief makes people count things instead of feeling them. But I watched it happen year after year, at every holiday, every visit, that same weighing look, like the house itself was already being divided up in their heads before anybody in it had even died. And then I watched you. You came into that family owing them nothing, and you gave them everything anyway. You sat with me through nights my own hands hurt too much to hold a cup of tea, and you never once asked me what was in it for you. You never asked what was in it for you with Ralph either, not once, not in all those years I watched from that back bedroom." Joyce made a small sound, not quite a sob, pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and looked away toward the wall for a moment. "I built a mill with my own 2 hands and Dwayne Morrison's, and when they shut it down in '88, I took my severance and I took what I'd saved from 40 years of selling my own cloth, and I did not put a dollar of it anywhere Kyle or Tracy could ever reach it by simply outliving me. I bought a half-acre of shoreline on Warramog because I used to walk it as a girl before anyone in this family owned a stick of that land, and there was a little caretaker's cottage on it already, small, plain, honest, and I thought, this is not a thing I am buying to be admired. This is a thing I am buying to be used someday by whoever finally deserves it and never once asked to." Martha's hands were shaking now, not badly, just enough that the page trembled where she held it. "I did not tell Ralph. I loved my son, but I watched him spend his whole life trying to keep the peace between his children and himself, and I did not trust peace to hold a secret this size. I did not tell a lawyer who'd talk. I told Dwayne because Dwayne can build a thing with his hands and never say a word about it to a living soul for the rest of his life. And I told Robinson because Robinson filed papers the way other men keep a promise. And then I put it where nobody would think to look, because nobody in this family, as far as I could tell, had ever once looked twice at anything of mine that didn't already have a price tag on it." She had to stop again. Adam reached over without a word and set a hand flat on the table near her, not touching her, just there, the way a person stands near a ledge without grabbing at someone who hasn't slipped yet. "If you are reading this, Martha, it means Ralph is gone, and it means you went looking for something even though every reason in the world told you not to bother. That tells me I picked right. I want you to have the cottage on the lake, and I want you to have whatever comes with holding a piece of land free and clear for the rest of your life. But more than that, I want you to know that somebody was watching, all those years you thought nobody was, and that somebody wrote it down and made it stand up in a courthouse, so that no room full of family and lawyers could ever again tell you that what you gave counted for nothing. You were never the outsider in that house. You were the only one who ever actually lived in it like it mattered. Bonnie Martha set the letter down on the table and put both hands flat over it, like she was holding it in place against a wind nobody else could feel. Nobody spoke for a moment. Dwayne had his cap off again, turning it slow in his hands, and when Martha finally looked up at him, his eyes were wet in a way she suspected he'd deny later if anyone asked him about it. I helped her build that hiding place, and she never told me a word of what was in it, he said. 38 years, I wondered. Figured it for old letters, maybe some cash she didn't trust a bank with. Never once thought she'd built herself a whole second life for somebody nobody in that family had even married into yet. She knew, Joyce said softly, in '88. Before you and Ralph were even a thought, Martha. She was already building a place for whoever turned out to deserve it. She just didn't know your name yet. Adam had gone quiet in the particular way lawyers go quiet when they're already 3 steps ahead into the paperwork. He picked up the notarized card, read it once more, then looked at Martha with something steadier in his face than the caution he'd been carrying since the office. I want to say this plainly, because I don't want you walking out of this room unsure of where you stand, he said. This letter is moving, and I understand why it's moving you, but it's the card underneath it that a court is going to look at first. Notarized designation of successor trustee, dated, witnessed, filed the same year as the instrument itself. That is about as clean as this kind of thing gets. Combined with the trust document itself never having lapsed, I don't see a court in this county having much trouble recognizing you as trustee of record, effective the moment we file the acceptance. And then what? Martha asked. Her voice had steadied some, though her hands hadn't quite. What happens after that? After that, we formalize it. There's a recording requirement to transfer the trustee designation of record with the county, which means it becomes a matter of public documentation. Once that filing goes through, anyone can look it up. It's not something we can do quietly forever, and honestly, I wouldn't want to. A trust like this deserves to stand out in the open, not stay buried the way it's been. Martha understood what he wasn't quite saying outright. Once that filing went through the county, it wouldn't stay a private thing between the 4 of them in a bank's back room. Kyle would hear about it. Tracy would hear about it. And whatever this had cost Bonnie 38 years of silence to protect was about to become something the rest of the family could see plainly for the first time, the same way Chad Hudson had once looked at a warped loom and called it worthless. Let them hear about it, Martha said finally, and was a little surprised at how even her own voice came out. I'm not going to build a second silence on top of the one she already kept. She hid it to protect it, not to keep me from ever standing in the light with it. Dwayne put his cap back on, settled it, and this time left it there. Then I suppose the next question, he said, is when? Adam was already sliding the trust instrument back into its sleeve, careful, the way a man handles something he intends to use rather than admire. Give me until Monday, he said. I want to file the acceptance clean. No loose threads Kyle's people could tug at later, if this ends up somewhere less friendly than a courthouse counter. I'll draw up what I need from you, we'll get your signature on record, and then it becomes exactly what your mother-in-law built it to be. Yours, filed, standing. Martha folded the letter back along its old creases, gentle, the way she used to fold Bonnie's shawls before laying them over the back of a chair in the lake cottage, and slid it into the envelope beside the card. She thought of the loom sitting in the rented room behind the hardware store, split frame, swollen beam. A thing a whole room of strangers had once agreed was worth exactly $60 and not a cent more. Monday then, she said, and stood, and for the first time since she'd signed her name away in Michael Stone's office, she felt like she was standing somewhere solid enough to hold her weight. Monday came in gray and ordinary, no different on the outside from any other Monday in New Preston, and that was exactly what struck Martha as she sat across from Adam Robinson in his office with a pen in her hand. Outside, someone was salting the sidewalk in front of the hardware store. Inside, she was about to sign her name to a piece of paper that would make her, in the eyes of Litchfield County, the trustee of something Bonnie Ferguson had spent 38 years keeping quiet. Right here, Adam said, tapping a line near the bottom of the page. And here. This one's the acceptance of trusteeship. This one authorizes me to file with the recorder's office this afternoon. And once I file it, it's public record. Anybody can walk in and pull it, same as anybody could always pull the original trust instrument if they'd known to look for it. Which, he added, nobody ever did. Because nobody ever thought to ask what an old weaver did with her severance check in 1988. Martha signed both lines. Her signature came out steadier than she expected, given how her hands had been the week before. There's one more thing, Adam said, sliding a third paper toward her. Standard for a property transfer of record. We need a current appraisal on file, for tax purposes, for the recording itself. I've already got someone lined up. Fellow named Whitcomb does most of the lake work for the county. He can walk the parcel Wednesday if that suits you. It suits me, Martha said, though the truth was nothing about any of it felt like it suited her yet. It still felt like something happening to somebody else, a story she was reading over another woman's shoulder. Wednesday, she stood on the half-acre for the first time in her life. The caretaker's cottage was smaller than the lake house on North Shore Road, one story, gray shingle gone soft and silver with age, a porch that sagged a little on the north end where the posts had settled. But it faced the water dead on, no other house crowding the view, just lake and far tree line and a dock with 2 boards missing near the end. Whitcomb walked the property with a clipboard and a laser measure, said almost nothing, and Martha didn't ask him anything either, because some part of her wasn't ready yet to hear a stranger put a number on a place Bonnie had loved enough to hide. The number came 4 days later, in an email Adam forwarded with no comment beyond forwarding it. Martha read it standing in the rented room behind the hardware store, the loom in the corner, still waiting on its rethreading, and had to sit down on the edge of the cot before she finished the second sentence. $850,000. She said it out loud to the empty room, just to hear whether it sounded any more real, spoken than it had on the screen. It didn't. It sounded like somebody else's number, attached to somebody else's lake, somebody else's life. The recording went through on a Friday. Adam called to tell her himself, which she took as a kindness, since she suspected a man that busy didn't usually make that call in person. It's filed, he said. It's real, Martha. Whatever happens next, that part's done. Nobody can undo the filing itself. What happens next, she asked, because she'd learned by then that with lawyers, there was always a next. Next is, we wait and see who goes looking for it, Adam said. County records aren't exactly a secret, but they're not exactly a headline either. Somebody has to think to check. Somebody thought to check on a Tuesday, 11 days after the filing, and the somebody was Tracy. Martha was in Joyce's front room when her phone rang, sitting with a cup of tea while Joyce worked a bobbin winder in the corner, filling shuttles for no particular reason, except that her hands liked to stay busy. Martha looked at the screen, saw Tracy's name, and felt her stomach drop the way it always had those last 5 years, whenever a Ferguson number lit up and she didn't yet know if it meant good news about Ralph or bad. You can let it go to voicemail, Joyce said, not looking up from the window. I know. Martha answered it anyway. Old habits didn't leave just because the reasons for them had. Martha. Tracy's voice had a brightness in it that didn't sit right, the kind of brightness people put on top of something else. I was hoping we could get coffee, just us. No lawyers, no Kyle. I think we've got some things to talk through, and I'd rather do it as family than as, I don't know, opposing parties. Martha looked at Joyce, who had stopped winding and was watching her now with open curiosity. All right, Martha said. Thursday. The diner on the green, 10 o'clock. Thursday came cold and clear, the kind of March morning that made the lake look like hammered tin from a distance. Martha got to the diner first and took a booth by the window, and when Tracy walked in 8 minutes late, shaking rain off an umbrella she hadn't needed, Martha noticed how tired she looked. Not dressed down tired, the other kind, the kind that lived behind the eyes no matter how the rest of a person was put together. Thanks for coming, Tracy said, sliding into the booth across from her. She ordered coffee, black, and didn't touch it once it came. You said we had things to talk through, Martha said. Tracy turned her cup a quarter turn on its saucer, twice, before she spoke. I found out about the property, the lake parcel. Somebody at Kyle's office does title work, pulled it up doing something unrelated, mentioned it to him. He called me. She looked up. $850,000, Martha. That's what it's worth. Do you understand what that is? I understand what it's worth, Martha said quietly. I read the appraisal myself. Kyle's furious. I want to be honest with you about that because I think you deserve honesty even if he's not going to give you any. Tracy wrapped both hands around the coffee cup without drinking from it, like she needed something warm to hold on to more than she needed the coffee itself. But I'm not calling for Kyle. I'm calling for me. I've got a mortgage I'm carrying alone now, since the divorce, and 2 kids in that mortgage with me. And I look at a number like that, and I don't see a villain's number, Martha. I see the kind of number that fixes a life. It fixes mine too, Martha said. It's the only one I've got left to fix it with. I know that. I do. Tracy's eyes were bright, and Martha couldn't tell yet if it was guilt building toward tears or toward something colder. I'm not asking you to hand it over. I'm not my brother. I just think, given everything, given that none of us even knew this existed a month ago, maybe the fairest thing is we keep this simple between us. Split it. You take 425. I take 425. Nobody has to stand up anywhere and say ugly things about anybody else's mother. We just quietly agree, the 2 of us, and it's done. Martha set her own cup down carefully, giving herself a moment before she answered. Outside the window, a man was scraping frost off a windshield 2 cars down, breath fogging in the cold. Tracy, she said, your grandmother built that trust in 1988. She named a successor by a notarized letter, sealed for 38 years, and she wrote out exactly why she did it. That's not a family agreement waiting to be split over coffee. That's a legal instrument that already says what it says. Legal instruments get amended all the time. People settle things outside of court constantly. You know that. I do know that. Martha kept her voice even, though something in her had gone very still and very clear. The way it used to go still in the middle of a bad night with Ralph, when there was no room left for anything but the next necessary thing. But I didn't spend 23 years being told I didn't count for anything, and then find out the one person in that whole family who actually saw me spent 38 years building a place where I'd finally be safe, just to turn around and quietly give half of it away, because it makes somebody else's morning easier. Tracy's jaw tightened. For a second, Martha thought she'd stand up and leave right there. She was my grandmother too, Tracy said, and her voice cracked slightly on grandmother, the brightness finally slipping to show what was under it. I loved her. I know it didn't look like it, not the way you loved her, but I did. I believe you, Martha said, and meant it. I'm not saying you didn't love her. I'm saying she watched something in this family for years that made her decide to build this the way she built it, in secret, sealed against exactly this kind of conversation. I don't think that was about not loving you. I think it was about what she was afraid this family would do with a number like $850,000 the first chance it got. Tracy didn't answer that. She looked down at her coffee, finally cold, and pushed the cup an inch away from her, like she was done pretending to want it. Kyle's not going to let this go quiet, she said after a while. I want you to hear that from me before you hear it from a process server. He's already talking to somebody about contesting it. Competency, he's saying. Says Bonnie was 91 before the end. Says nobody in their right mind hides an $850,000 property in a piece of furniture. She wasn't 91 in 1988, Martha said. She was 64, same age I am now. Something moved across Tracy's face at that, quick, gone almost before Martha could name it. I didn't think about it that way, she admitted. Most people don't until somebody makes them. Martha reached into her coat pocket, pulled out enough for her own tea and Tracy's untouched coffee both, and set it on the table. I'm not going to fight you for sport, Tracy. I never wanted to fight anybody for anything. But I'm not signing away what she built for me either. Not for $425,000, and not for family peace that only ever seemed to cost me something. She stood, buttoned her coat, and looked down at Tracy one more time, the younger woman still sitting there, with her hands wrapped around a cup gone cold. Tell Kyle I said that too, Martha said. Save him the trip. The papers came on a Tuesday morning, 8 days after the diner, delivered by a young man in a windbreaker who asked Martha to sign for them right there on Joyce's front step, like she was accepting a package instead of a fight. Martha Ferguson, he said, and she said yes before she'd even looked at what he was holding, the way she still answered to anything with Ferguson attached to it, 23 years of habit not gone, just because the name had turned strange in her mouth lately. She signed the little screen with the stylus he handed her, and he was gone before she'd finished reading the top line of the folder he left behind. She stood on the step with it in her hands, cold coming up through her socks, and read it twice before Joyce came to the door, wondering why she hadn't come back in. What is it? Joyce asked, and Martha handed it over, rather than say it out loud the first time. Joyce read it standing in the doorway, glasses pushed down her nose, and her mouth went thin and flat the way it did when a weft thread snapped mid-row, and she had to decide whether to fix it or start the whole panel again. "He's contesting it," Joyce said, formally. "Competency, same as Tracy warned you. Says Bonnie wasn't of sound mind when she executed the trust in 1988. Says a woman who hides $850,000 of property inside a piece of furniture isn't thinking clearly. She's hiding from something." "She was 64, Martha said. "I keep saying it and nobody in that family wants to hear it. He heard it. He just doesn't care." Joyce handed the folder back. "There's a date on the last page." Martha turned to it. "A hearing set for 6 weeks out at the Litchfield County Recorder's Office, and beneath the date, in smaller print, a line about the 60 days Kyle had to bring his contest before it lapsed on its own, a line Adam had warned her about weeks ago in his office, back when it had still sounded like something that might never actually happen. He filed with 2 days to spare," Martha said, half to herself, cutting it close for a man who's so sure he's right. Or he needed the 2 days to find himself a lawyer, willing to stand up and call a dead woman senile in open court, Joyce said, and there was an edge in it Martha hadn't heard from her before. Not once in all the afternoons they'd spent together with tea and bobbins and Bonnie's old letters between them. Martha called Adam from Joyce's kitchen phone, the folder open on the table in front of her, her finger tracing the hearing date like touching it might change it. "I saw," he said, before she'd gotten 2 words out. "His lawyer filed the notice with the county this morning. I get a copy same as you do. I want you to hear this part clearly, Martha, because I don't want you spending the next 6 weeks afraid of something that isn't as strong as it sounds on paper. Tell me, a competency challenge on a 1988 instrument is hard to win under the best circumstances. It gets a lot harder when the person you're calling incompetent ran a working mill, kept her own books, trained apprentices, and by every account anyone can produce, was sharper than most people half her age right up until the year she died. Kyle's not building a case. He's building pressure. He's hoping you fold before it ever gets in front of a judge. I'm not folding. I didn't think you were, but I want you ready for what he's going to use, because I've seen this move before. He's going to stand up in that hearing and hold up Chad Hudson's own auction sheet, the one that values the loom at $60, and he's going to say that if this family had known or even suspected there was anything of value connected to that loom, nobody would have let it go for scrap. He's going to use your own ignorance as his proof that Bonnie's plan was proof of nothing but an old woman losing her grip. Martha sat with that a moment, the coldness of it, using the very blindness that had let her carry the loom off for $60 as a weapon against the truth the loom had been hiding. Then we'll need Chad Hudson too, she said slowly. Not against us, for us. He can say what he saw that day same as anybody. A warped frame and a swollen beam, nothing more. Because nobody could see what was inside it. Not him, not me, not even Kyle standing right there in that room. Now you're thinking like I need you to think, Adam said. And there was something almost warm under the lawyer's caution in his voice. I've already asked Rosa Patel to have her full report ready by the hearing date. Paper stock, ink, tool marks in the beam, all of it dated to 1988. No later, no earlier. I've asked Joyce to bring the letters, all of them, so the judge can see Bonnie's hand didn't change, didn't shake, didn't wander, not in 1974 and not in 2014. And I want Dwayne there in person, not a statement, not an affidavit. A judge needs to look a man like that in the eye and hear him say what he watched with his own hands. He'll come, Martha said. He hasn't missed a single Tuesday since the sale barn. She hung up the phone and stood in Joyce's kitchen a long moment, listening to the house settle around her, the bobbin winder ticking faintly from the front room, where Joyce had gone back to work, because idle hands, Joyce always said, were how worry got its foothold. Martha thought about the 6 weeks ahead of her, the hearing waiting at the end of them like a held breath, and found, to her own surprise, that what she felt wasn't dread so much as a kind of steadiness she hadn't carried into a room in a very long time. Dwayne came by that evening, letting himself in the side door the way he'd taken to doing, cap already off before he was fully through it. Joyce called me, he said, told me about the hearing. He set a paper bag on the table, apples from his own tree, out of season and a little soft, the kind you eat anyway because a man picked them himself and carried them over. I want you to know something, Martha, and I want you to actually hear it, not just be polite about it. I'm not coming to that hearing because somebody asked me to. I'm coming because I spent a week of my life in 1988 helping a woman I respected more than almost anybody I ever worked beside build something she believed in, and I will be damned if I'm going to sit home and let her own grandson stand up in a courtroom and call her out of her mind for it. Dwayne, I mean it. Sound as a bell, that woman was. Sharper than me most days. And I wasn't exactly slow on the floor back then. She knew precisely what she was doing with that beam, precisely what she was doing with that trust, and she knew precisely who she was building it for, even before your name had a face attached to it in her mind. I watched her plan it. I'm not letting anybody rewrite that into some sad story about a confused old lady. Not while I've still got breath to stand up and say otherwise. Martha felt something come up in her throat that she had to swallow down hard before it turned into something she wasn't ready to let out yet. Not in Joyce's kitchen, not over a bag of soft apples. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet, Dwayne said, gruff again, embarrassed by his own heat. Save it for after, when we've actually done something with it. The 6 weeks went by the way waiting always did, slower some days than others, faster whenever there was something to do instead of just carry the date around in her chest. Rosa Patel called twice, once to confirm the ink on the deed-matched period-correct formulations from the late 80s with no modern additives, and once just to ask, gently, how Martha was holding up, which struck Martha as a strange kindness from a woman she'd only met because of tool marks in a hollow beam. Adam sent drafts of the filing for her to review, dense with language she read 3 times before it settled into sense, and each time she signed something he sent, she thought of the pen in Michael Stone's office, the one that had taken everything from her without a single argument on her behalf, and how different this pen felt in her hand now, going the other direction entirely. Tracy didn't call again, not in those 6 weeks, and Martha found she didn't know quite how to feel about the silence. Not angry, not exactly relieved either, just aware of it, the way you're aware of a door left standing open, a crack down a hallway, not shut, not walked through. 5 days before the hearing, Adam called with one more thing he wanted her to consider, careful in the way he'd been careful since the beginning, weighing every word before he let it out. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer, he said. The hearing's public. County Recorder's Office, open docket, anybody can sit in who wants to. That includes reporters, if word gets around, which in a town this size, word usually does. I need to know if you're prepared for that, because once this is heard in that room, it isn't quiet anymore. It's not a family matter behind closed doors. It's a matter of record, out where anybody can see exactly what Bonnie Ferguson built and exactly what her family tried to take back from the woman she built it for. Martha looked out Joyce's front window at the gray afternoon, at the bobbin winder gone still on the table, at the shape of her own reflection, faint in the glass. 64 years old and about to stand in a room and answer for a life nobody had thought worth writing down. Let them see it, she said. I've spent 23 years being the part of this family nobody bothered to look at closely. I'm not going to start hiding now, 5 days before the one room in the world that's finally going to look. The hearing room at the Litchfield County Recorder's Office wasn't much bigger than Joyce's front parlor, rows of folding chairs, fluorescent light overhead. A clerk stamping folders at a side table like it was any other Tuesday. Martha sat between Adam and Joyce with her hands folded in her lap, and when she looked back once, she saw Dwayne in the row behind her, cap in his hands instead of on his head, and Rosa Patel beside him, with a slim folder she kept squared against her knee, like it might try to get away from her. Kyle's lawyer went first. He held up Chad Hudson's auction sheet, waved it once for the room to see, and said the words Martha had been bracing for since Adam warned her. This is a woman who let an $850,000 property leave her own barn for $60 in scrap lumber, Your Honor, because nobody in this family, including the claimant, had any idea what Bonnie Ferguson built or why. That is not evidence of a careful plan. That is evidence of a woman who buried something so deep even she may not have remembered why. The judge, a gray-haired woman with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, looked over the sheet without much expression and said she'd hear from the witnesses before she decided what any of it meant. Dwayne went first. He didn't need notes. He told the room about a week in 1988. Sawdust on the mill floor, Bonnie standing over the beam with a pencil behind her ear, giving him measurements to the 16th of an inch and telling him exactly why the cap needed to turn against the grain so nobody who didn't already know would ever think to try. "I've built cabinets with confused people," Dwayne said. "I've built them with sharp ones, too. I know which one she was. There wasn't a foggy day in that woman the whole week I was beside her." Joyce read the letter next, Bonnie's own words filling the little room, steady in a voice Martha had come to know as well as her own. When Joyce got to the part where Bonnie wrote about watching 2 children grow into people who only ever asked what she'd leave them and one daughter-in-law who never once asked for anything at all, Martha heard someone shift hard in the seats behind her and didn't need to turn around to know it was Kyle. Rosa spoke last, plain and precise, dates and materials, ink formulation, tool marks, a handwriting match against 40 years of Joyce's letters that didn't waver by so much as a slant. "There is nothing in the physical evidence," Rosa said, "that is consistent with impairment. Everything is consistent with a deliberate, well-executed plan carried out by a steady hand." When it was Martha's turn, she didn't attack anything Kyle's lawyer had said. She stood and she looked at the judge, and she said the loom had been called Firewood once, in a sale barn, by a man who had no reason to think otherwise, because that was exactly what Bonnie had built it to look like. "You called it Firewood," Martha said, turning slightly so the words reached the row behind her too. Turns out that was the only honest thing anybody in this family ever said out loud about what they thought I was worth. Bonnie heard that, long before any of us did. She just heard it 38 years early, and she built something so nobody would ever get to say it and have it be true. The room was quiet after that. Even the clerk had stopped stamping. The judge didn't take long. She said the recorded trust instrument was properly executed, properly filed, and never revoked, and that nothing presented that morning came close to establishing incompetence in a woman who, by every account, including her own family's, had run a mill, trained apprentices, and kept her own books without error until the year it closed. She dismissed the contest. Kyle's 60 days ran out 3 weeks later, with no appeal filed, and Adam called to tell Martha so, in a voice that sounded, for the first time since she'd met him, like a man setting down something heavy. Tracy called before Adam did. "I heard," she said. "I'm not calling to fight about it." A pause, longer than Martha expected. "I want to see it. The cottage. If that's all right." They drove out together on a Saturday in early spring, Tracy quiet most of the way. And when they pulled up the gravel drive and the lake opened up gray and wide past the trees, Tracy sat with her hands in her lap for a moment before she got out of the car. The porch was a mess of leaves and a fallen gutter, and a stack of someone's old lobster traps nobody had claimed in years. Tracy pulled work gloves out of her coat pocket like she'd planned for it. "I already paid the $40 for the dump run," she said. "Figured you shouldn't have to pay to clean up somebody else's junk on your own porch." They worked through the afternoon without much talk, and when they were done, Tracy stood at the porch rail looking out at the water and said, "She built this for you before I was even old enough to understand what building something for somebody meant." She didn't apologize, not exactly, but she didn't need to. Martha understood the gloves and the $40 and the quiet afternoon well enough. Joyce rethreaded the loom herself, 2 weeks of careful work at Martha's kitchen table before it ever moved to the cottage. And when it was done, Dwayne carried it in through the front door in 3 pieces and set it up facing the water, the light coming in low across the reed and the warp threads catching it like something alive. Martha ran her hand along the beam where the cap had once sat crooked, sealed against a family that hadn't known where to look and thought that what Bonnie had hollowed out wasn't a hiding place at all, not really. It was a room built inside a room, the way Bonnie had always built everything, patient and half a turn different from anyone else, waiting for the one person who would know to open it. By summer, Martha had 2 afternoons a week filled with women from town, learning to throw a shuttle and beat a weft straight, the old loom creaking the same rhythm it must have kept for 40 years at the mill. And in the evenings, when the house was quiet and the lake had gone still and silver, she sat at the window with a cup of tea and looked out at water that belonged to no one but her, in a house nobody could take, at a loom nobody would ever again call worthless.